Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have yet another wonderful, amazing, super interesting guest on Mormonish Podcast today. We have our friend Aaron. How are you today, Aaron?
Hi, I'm well, thanks. How are you, Rebecca?
We are good. We've been talking to Aaron for, a couple months now about this presentation that he approached us with. And we were just so intrigued because it's always a hot topic. It's always in the news. People are always talking about tithing. That's what we're going to be talking about today, but from a very unique perspective, because Aaron is a faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we're going to let him introduce himself and talk about why this topic is near and dear to his heart and how he created this presentation for us today.
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. I am by profession an accountant, and I graduated from BYU in 2009 with a master's degree in accountancy. My wife and I immediately moved to Florida, where I knocked out the CPA exam, and I've been in the industry ever since. During that time, I've also served in wards numerous times as a financial clerk, and I've also served in a couple bishoprics as the executive secretary, and so I also have that kind of inside view of church finances at the local level, both the good, bad, and the ugly. And we'll be drawing on that experience in this discussion. But all of that background has shaped my views on this important topic, and it's something that really people don't talk about enough. Usually, when you hear this, we're talking about this question today of 10% of what to calculate tithing, and what I've found typically is that conversation is taboo unless you're just trying to bandy about, is it before or after taxes? And that's a funny discussion because it always just devolves into how people feel about the government. And so, not a very productive Sunday school topic, I guess. So I'm hoping to shed some light on that.
No, that's funny you should say that because I just did have a conversation like this with a younger extended family member who was just getting their first job, and we were talking about tithing, and I was trying to explain taxes to them and how it would come out of your paycheck. And then I said, well, of course, you're going to have to decide, do you want to pay your tithing before they take the taxes out or after? And the family member's like, what do you mean before? Like he couldn't comprehend that might be something. So it is a very interesting topic. There's just so much nuance about it, I think I'll say.
Yeah, we'll give them even more to think about after tonight.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I think the argument of gross or net is always something that comes up in any discussion on tithing in church. It always comes down to, do you pay on your gross or your net? And of course, the standard Sunday school answer is, do you want blessings on your gross or on your net? So, but now we've got, what does your accountant say you should pay?
Yeah, and as we see, the answer might surprise you. And it's not just what the accountant says. We're going to be drawing on church statements and official policy, because this is kind of a case of runaway Pharisaical orthodoxy, if I can put it that way. When we get back to what's actually taught and modeled, it's far more liberating than most people realize. So with that, are we ready to jump in?
I think we're ready to jump in. Let's do it. This sounds extremely intriguing.
I think it's important to say that, Aaron, you are a faithful member of the church, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you do pay tithing, and so we know that there's a lot of mixed faith marriages out there, mixed faith couples, people who have family members who are in, maybe kids. And so a lot of people might say, well, why are you talking about tithing on Post-Mormon? We don't pay tithing, but there's a lot of people out there who still pay tithing, or their spouse pays tithing, and that can be a point of contention in a mixed faith marriage, especially when one stops believing and doesn't want to pay. And so this is just to give some ideas of what maybe they should be paying that helps you to have that discussion.
Yeah, I'm glad you point that out, because we certainly do not want to be prescriptive in this discussion. As you mentioned, there are lots and lots of different household scenarios that require this is going to be a matter of individual discernment. And so I would also mention too, I know you have international viewership as well. So, I'll apologize up front. This is going to be couched in, terms of American dollars or whatever, just because that's what I know. And that's what the church operates in here, but for any nuance, I would encourage people really make this your own and think about it in your situation and see how it plays out. But yeah, it's an important topic for all of those situations. Even people who are outside of the church or never Mormons or whatever, you might know people who are directly impacted by this or related concepts in your own belief paradigms. So I hope everybody finds something out of this.
No, I'm sure they can, because as I look at post-Mormon social media or even just my own personal situation, people have parents who are still paying tithing. Sometimes people are helping parents who then pay tithing, and that can be very dicey. People have kids that are paying tithing. So you're right, it runs the gamut. Could be a spouse in a mixed faith marriage. So I think this will be invaluable just to understand through faithful sources, what is tithing all about, really?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go for it. So as we said, we're addressing this question, 10% of what? And the main goal that we have here is that we want to empower individual discernment in that area. And as a related secondary goal, we want an environment that is conducive to individuals exercising that discernment. Because, to be honest, in my experience, bishops and stake presidents they're not trained very well in this area. And because orthodoxy has just, I mentioned is just kind of run away in this, it's very easy for even, your most empathetic bishops to default to weighing in inappropriately because they haven't been trained otherwise, right? So, and I also want to mention a few things that we're not covering this discussion. First is history, because I am a bean counter. I am not a historian, and that has already been told by qualified men and women. People can go listen to them. But also, we're trying to make this as objective as possible. And when you take a 150-year-old quote that was from a bartering society and try to apply it after all the economic changes to today, it just gets pretty subjective. And so, we'll leave that to others. The questions whether or not to pay anything at all, or whom to pay, or the use of donations, those are not part of this discussion inherently. That is not to say these are unimportant questions. They're very important questions, but they're very personal matters, and individuals will exercise, personal moral license in decisions in that area. What we want to do again is we're kind of we're exploring those bounds. What does the church actually say on this, and what are some things to think about inside of that? And then people can follow their conscience wherever that leads them, right? And then the last thing is non-public guidance. Personally, I am not aware of any like hidden or secret bishops council or whatever. That's not to say like a stake president couldn't tell all of his bishops, do this with your members or whatever. But as we'll see, any such guidance is inconsistent with the church's actual policy and is therefore superseded and not binding. So we are not going to be counting any of that in. But if people want to throw that in the comments, just as interesting gee whizzers, I'm sure you'll welcome that, won't you, Landon and Rebecca?
I'm sure everyone has a story like that. And you're so right. Bishops are so different. Some will say, I don't care if you had a job and don't have money for your food. Pay your tithing first. Others will say, here, I'm going to help you and we'll catch up on that later. So you're absolutely right. It's tithing roulette. Don't you think, Landon?
Yeah, what I like about this approach here is you're talking about individual discernment. You're going to give us ideas on how you can determine it. I think so long in the church, it's like, well, if I get a car from work, do I pay tithing on that? And the answer is always, well, what do you feel good not paying tithing on that? And it becomes guilt rather than discernment that makes you decide, or fear. Yeah. So I think the fact that you're going to approach this by looking at what do the scriptures say about it, or what are the statements by the first presidency in the manual to help you discern and not just pay because you feel guilty about it.
Yeah. People don't have a justified way to think about doing anything different often, and scrupulosity definitely kicks in. So let's look at the current guidance of the church. So just a brief statement for the Never Mormon audience. Members of the church are required to pay a 10% tithing in order to enjoy the full, the benefits of full participation and remain in good standing with the church. And that is not executed in a way like that your account is linked up and they pull the money or anything like that. This is all on the honor system. And as part of that honor system, members are supposed to report their tithe paying status to their bishop annually. And so this screenshot here is from the church website that offers guidance on that process. And it defines full tithe payer status. Landon, do you think you want to read that highlighted portion?
Sure. This is the definition of full tithe payer. All donors whose tithing is 1/10 of all their interest annually, which is understood to mean income.
Okay,
That's
so
First Presidency letter. Yeah.
Yep, that's the church's tithing policy in a nutshell. Tithing is paid on income, or 1/10 of income, right? And so a couple of things to point out here. This is from the 1970 First Presidency letter, which is expounding upon LDS Scripture, the Doctrine and Covenants 119. So you have as your foundation Scripture and authoritative interpretation. Okay, as we're going to see, there's a lot of teachings that get layered on top of that, but those two components are the policy, and here it's just abbreviated for these purposes. Of course, the church doesn't define what income is. And I'm sure, have you guys heard the phrase, nature abhors a vacuum?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to say in this context, orthodoxy abhors ambiguity, and it steps in and fills that void, as we talked about before, with false expectations. You know, you mentioned the phrase, what do you want? Gross blessings or net blessings, right? That's the default phrase. Where does that appear in the scriptures? Nowhere. Right? Where is it in the official policies? Nowhere. It's just one of those rules of thumb, you know, and to be honest, let's be fair, right? If income is not defined, then we can't rule out gross as a valid option, right? That's an option. But is it the option? Right, that's kind of the question here. And there's a couple problems I want to point out with this. First is that gross is really kind of an artificial construct. Okay, you know, you imagine, you know, two people each getting paid $50,000. That's what their paycheck says at the end of the year. One of those people is getting full health coverage, childcare, and retirement, and the other one gets nothing, no fringe benefits whatsoever. Okay, well, those are very different realities, even though the paycheck is saying the same thing. And again, in these discussions, I just chuckle, well, you know, while people are arguing over taxes as if, you know, God would outsource something like that to the IRS. You know, when I really just want to ask these people who are trumpeting about gross is, you know what? Did you know that your employer is paying half of your FICA taxes? And while we're at it, why don't you tell me about your valuation methodologies for healthcare and 401k or pension if you got one of those? The accounting on pensions is absolutely wild. And if you wanted to value all of these things properly, you would have to either hire or be a CPA. And obviously, that should not be a requirement for everyday members, just rank and file, paying their tithing. Okay, but the point is, some of these realities hit very differently, and that becomes a huge problem if you're, you know, if it works for you and you're turning around and imposing that on someone else, right? And I would say that to any Orthodox people listening to this, if it works for you and you feel good with it, by all means continue, but you need to be cognizant about other situations that are not your own. So that kind of prompts a question. If gross isn't universally applicable, what other options are there? Right?
Can I just add,
Yeah,
it's
go
so
ahead.
funny you should bring this up. The first time I ever came across this mindset was when I was newly married, just moved into my first house, first neighborhood. And there was a neighbor across the street who was now I see it was religious scrupulosity. And he just manifested it in every way you could imagine. But we were visiting one day and he had all this paperwork out on the counter. And I said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, I'm calculating my tithing." And I said, "Oh, you know, because I just paid out like you described. I look at my paycheck and I chose net. You know, I saw what actual dollars went into my account and I paid tithing on it." People don't know exactly what you said. I'm adding up. Let's see, my healthcare benefit, my company's cooking in this much. So I'm taking 10%, and then they're giving this much to my 401k. And I was like, you're what? I had never thought of that before, that some people do that. They take that benefit, which can be like half your paycheck. I mean, seriously, some people, everything's not monetary, it's benefit like that. And I'd never seen that before. And of course, I was not about to do that. Again, personal choice, right? But I just couldn't believe that there were some people that really believed that's how it worked. And that's when I first started to realize what you're saying here. What is gross? What is it exactly?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that. Oh, go ahead, Landon.
I was going to say, I was in the military, and a lot of your benefits in the military come in the way of benefits. For instance, as a second lieutenant, I was given a house to live in on base. What's the value of that house? Am I supposed to pay tithing? It's not my house, it's the government's house, but I get to live in it. So certainly there's a benefit from that. And if I go live off post, they give me a certain amount of money for housing, but then I might be spending that whole amount. So can I really value the house at whatever they would have given me to go live off post? It brought up a bunch of questions. I always said, boy, why didn't the church just have turbo tithe, where I just enter in all the information and it spits out what I'm supposed to pay, you know? But I'm glad they don't, because they probably make it the worst case. Unlike, you know, that the tax software is always trying to save you so you pay the least tax, but I figured turbo tithe would make you pay the most.
Yeah, well, and the funny thing about it, Landon, is that when you take all of those things into consideration in their proper context, it really doesn't become a complicated situation at all. It really just points to alternate methods. Because again, the church doesn't specify a method.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it leaves room for someone like my neighbor, who is going to pay way more than what is listed on his paycheck as gross, or somebody like me who looked at my net and said, no, bring down a little bit, you know. And all of us felt okay going in and saying, I'm a full tithe payer, because we were doing what we felt was the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it also brings up, if you paid into a pension, or if you paid into a 401k, if you paid on your gross, and then when you retire and you start pulling from that, you've already paid tithing on that. So now you're paying on it twice. But if you don't pay on it, how do you really determine what the value is? Is it just as you take it out each month that you pay on it? So it brings up a lot.
Yeah, it gets pretty confusing pretty quick. I remember,
and it's a reality. I work in the industry too, and I do, you know, to be very vague about it, I do see especially older people that do this tithe over and over and over. Then it's inherited by a family member, tithe. You know, I think there's this concept, and maybe it's the easy way around. Whatever money shows up in my bank account, no matter how it got there or what it was, we need to tithe it, you know, and that can lead to problems, because that's not accurate.
Yeah. And if you're a bishop or a ward clerk consuming this, you got to watch out for that stuff. It happens. Yeah, you know, and there's nothing wrong with tactfully approaching a member as the bishop and you know, finding out if there's a misunderstanding that is playing out to that member's detriment. Right.
Yeah,
and an ethical bishop should do that, because there is a lot of misunderstanding. Anecdotally, I see among older members who may look at their, say, brokerage statement or something and say, oh, look, I have this much money, I need to pay this much tithing this month. And it's like, no, that's just your statement. That's not, you don't really have the money. You know?
Yeah, especially in a culture that is traditionally patriarchal with you know, where the man is taking care of the finances, and you know, and maybe he passes away and his widow is now doing finances for the first time.
100%.
Those are your high risk areas. So yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. Should we look at these other methods?
Let's do it.
Yep, let's do it.
So much to say. We can't be quiet and let you present. It's such a great
that's
topic.
Okay. You know, I mean, I love it. I just hear people talk about I hear tithing come up and my brain shuts down. And I hope that's not true with this discussion, because we're doing things a little bit different.
Yep.
But yeah, so I thought about it and I played with the numbers, and I came up with this chart that I call the tithing curve. And I'm going to do my best to explain this for those who are audio only. Okay, but what we're doing here is we're charting how these different methods play out over different ranges of incomes. Okay. And I've got three kind of types here: gross, net, and surplus. So gross, again, that's where you're trying to pay 10% off the top, whatever you deem that to be. But the intention is for everything to be in there. And then surplus is going to be 10% of what's left after meeting your basic needs. Okay, and net can be something in between. Maybe that's something like I don't know. You just apply additional deductions, or maybe you see the pros and cons in both the bookend methods and take the average, or maybe you're the type of person who and maybe it's scrupulosity, I don't know, but maybe you really like the idea of gross at some point, but you don't like the idea of being upside down because of tithing. That doesn't feel right, and so you kind of cap it. You calculate it on gross and then cap it. There's just a lot of different ways to think about it. I just named a few. But back to the chart. So we have on the horizontal axis, it's income ranging from low to high. And then the vertical axis is tithing as a percentage of surplus. Again, what you have left after your basic needs are met. So the easiest line in here is the surplus method, because by definition, that's 10% of surplus. It's just a horizontal line, straight line at 10%. But where this gets
just to be clear, for surplus, you're saying like you take your paycheck, you pay on that. You also say, I've got a house payment, so I'm not going to, I'm going to say kind of like you would do your taxes. You kind of deduct the things that you need to live. And then what you have left over after that each month, that's what you would pay 10% of.
Yeah. You define what your needs.
You decide.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, because there's some people who are like, the house is the house, right? Yes. I have to live in it. The house is the house. And there's some people who are like, I could live in a smaller house, but I choose to live in a bigger house. So I'm only deducting, or I'm only counting half of this as it's just whatever you think to do, right?
There's like my Starbucks card, which is a necessity. I would not, I would deduct that out, and then
Yeah, you can't pay tithing on Starbucks. That's not allowed. I like the surplus method because 10% of zero is zero. So I like that.
Come on, Landon.
I think 10% of zero is zero, donation? Whichever one you're following.
Oh, that's funny. But this shows there's so many different ways to look at it. That's the thing. Yeah. So many. I doubt you could get two Mormons in a room, and they would be exactly aligned. Everybody has a different way that they think about it.
Well, and isn't that wonderful? Isn't that what this is supposed to be? Right? This is supposed to work for everyone. I think we forget that a lot. But yeah, so like we were saying, 10% surplus is just a flat line on the chart. And the interesting part is that gross, if you're starting at the high end, it's very close to surplus. But as you come down the income scale, that line starts ticking up. And when you get into the low moderate range, it just starts picking up before, and then it's like shooting straight up. Okay. And if you think about it, take your bookend examples. Like if you have somebody who's earning $500,000 a year, right? If we move down $1,000 on the income scale, that's not going to change anything. Like $1,000 at that level is basically nothing. Okay. But let's go down to $50,000. Somebody's making $50,000, and let's say that their needs are 45, right? So their 10% tithing of $5,000 is going to take out all of their surplus income. So on the chart here, they would be at 100%. Okay. Now imagine, now let's go from 50 to 49. Their needs are still 45. Their tithing only went down $100 to 4,900, but they only have $4,000 surplus now. So now we're in the situation where that member is having to exercise mathematics defying faith. Because remember, we categorize these needs. Therefore, if we cut them out, that's not a sustainable situation anymore. So, at the high end, you're exercising faith to subordinate wants. And at the low end of income, you're exercising just logic defying faith. These are very, very different situations.
Wow. Okay? And this fits right in with the conference talk years ago where they said, if it comes down to between feeding your family and paying your tithing, pay your tithing. The people on that certain end, they are making that decision there. Like you said, it's a very narrow margin.
Recontextualize some of that based on the actual guidance that I'm not even sure they were aware of. when they gave those talks.
This is so interesting.
So yeah, but that's really the way this plays out. And I want to mention the scale of this chart too. Okay, what we're seeing right here is only the upper half of incomes, because people at the median income are generally paycheck to paycheck breaking even. Okay, so I mean, if we charted the whole range, that line would be going just straight up and up and up and up, right? Because it just gets high really, really quick. And that would ruin, we wouldn't really have a useful chart if that were the case.
Well,
but I
that's
just
where all
want
the
people to
faith
be
promoting
aware.
stories fit in, right? When you get to those extremes,
Oh,
you
straight up
have
lines.
nothing.
Yeah.
Suddenly the check shows up, or the bishop steps in. And that's where you get those stories where you're praying and paying your tithing and it works out. However, if you use some of these other methods, maybe you don't have to cut it that close. You can still have faith,
Yeah.
still
And
donate,
I
and you
have
can
one of
still
those
be
stories.
okay and not terrified.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got one of those stories. It's kind of cool. My wife and I, and this is because I just totally screwed up the counting and the budgeting.
Aren't you an accountant?
I hadn't earned my degree yet. I was still working on it. But yeah, I messed it up, and we were $1,000 short, and we went through that whole conflict. Are we going to pay or not? Yada yada, and and we decided, well, let's just pay, and we'll figure it out. And and days later, an odd job came up for me to paint a house while we were out of state visiting for $1,000, and it's very faith promoting. It's very cool. And and as I was kind of living in the high from that, I thought, yeah, but this is because I screwed up the math. What about like these budgets that are perpetually upside down? And you start thinking that, oh, did that, when you hear about the miraculous check appearing in the mail, what happened the next month?
Right. No,
Right.
Deus ex machina.
Yeah. And we'll talk about some of that more a little bit later. But
no, it's the reality of it. You just hear those stories, and you do have I have stories like that too. I think everyone does. And whether you want to call it serendipity or coincidence, we all have those stories. But you're right. Look at the big picture, look at the larger trajectory, and it doesn't mean necessarily what you think it does.
And I think we tend to cherry pick those too. You got the house painting job, paid $1,000, and you look at that as faith promoting. The next week, your car breaks down and costs you $1,000, but you still tell that as a faith promoting story that you got the job painting the house, and you're still $1,000 short at the end of the month.
And that's, and in addition to that, just in my experience in church service, that miraculous check doesn't always show up.
Yep.
You have a lot of these situations that are just knock down, drag out, and they don't end happily. And that's reality. It should not be ignored in favor of a faith promoting narrative, right? We've got to be gospel wise. Everybody's got to be a grown up and deal with the reality of a situation. But we don't want to steal our thunder too much from the, we'll get into some of that some more in a bit. So back to policy. What we showed before was just a blurb. This is the expanded letter. Rebecca, are you able to see that, to read it?
Yes, I know. Everyone asks me that now. Yes, I can. If I could describe to people how small my screen is, they'd be impressed I can read anything. But yes, I can read this. It's the 1970 First Presidency letter, and it says, "For your guidance in this matter, please be advised that we have uniformly replied that the simplest statement we know of is that statement of the Lord himself, that the members of the church should pay 1/10 of all their interest annually, which is understood to mean income. No one is justified in making any other statement than this. We feel that every member of the church should be entitled to make his own decision as to what he thinks he owes the Lord and to make payment accordingly."
What do you think of that?
Well, I know they added, which we understand to mean income. So yeah, they put their heads together and say, let's just call it income. But even that, like you said, is very nebulous. I mean, and it is one of the weird areas in the church where they leave it up to interpretation. They've just hammered down on garments, which was becoming more and more open to interpretation. And they slapped everybody back down and said, nope, this is what it means. Word of wisdom is very strict. So it's funny that this area is something that's kind of left up, at least on the surface, left up to personal interpretation. I have been in tithing settlements where they have looked at what we paid and said, I don't think that's everything, right? Where they have made judgments. Then I have been in tithing settlements where they haven't even looked at the paper. They've just said, okay, you say you are, you are. I've been in tithing settlements where they say, oh, hopefully you'll have a better year next year, which I do not appreciate that kind of commentary. Yeah. So it again, it's tithing roulette.
Yeah, but
I'm trying to figure out where it says that the Lord himself said that. I don't remember anywhere in the New Testament or the Book of Mormon where Jesus himself said, pay 1/10 of your income. Is this a Doctrine and Covenants reference? In which case it's not the Lord himself, it's through a prophet. So,
Right.
well, I mean, yeah, we'll nuance their verbiage there. The point is, this is the basis for the church's current policy. So, I mean, that would be a separate discussion as to whether or not we believe that when they say which is understood to mean income, I think individuals can always take personal license where their conscience dictates them. Again, just for framing this discussion, this is the church's policy that it's based on income. What I like, though, usually it gets cut off of that part, right? This is the exact same statement that we read before, and they only have that first part here.
Yeah.
It might make sense in that context, but usually these last two points get left out. And this is the mic drop moment. We could end the podcast right here and let people take this to their bishop to tithing settlement, right?
Yeah.
No one is justified in making any other statement than this. We feel that every member of the church should be entitled to make his own decision as to what he thinks he owes the Lord and to make payment accordingly.
Why do you think they leave that off when you hear that so often? You hear the first part. Why do you think they leave that off? I think it's because it does leave it up to personal revelation, personal interpretation. Tells you that no one, like my bishop that said, are you sure that's your gross? He didn't have any right to say that based on this statement right here. I feel it's a full tithe. I'm going to say it's a full tithe. And as it says, no one is justified in making any other statement.
Exactly. I can't say why they do that, but it's very similar to that quote from Lorenzo Snow about every man, woman, and child should pay tithing, right? And they leave off who has means.
Exactly.
That changes
That's
everything.
a big one.
Yeah.
Right? That changes everything. That injects a whole boatload of mercy into the situation.
Yep.
And discretion and I don't think it's right to leave this important context out. So I think I'll leave it at that. But this is beautiful, because usually what I don't want to say usually, we have these situations a lot of times where controversy in the church comes directly out of a church official policy or statement, right? This is a case where the official policy is actually quite expansive, and it's culture that is kind of the problem, right? So really, that's kind of at the root of what we're getting after today is fixing the culture, I forgot my train of thought with that.
No, I love that because I think you do have other voices that are telling you how you should pay tithing. Like I have a very dicey relationship with tithing because my parents got married right in the era of the Windows of Heaven movie. So it was all about tithing, the push. People of my parents' age, everything was about tithing. And I've told the story before of Christmas morning, we would have to bring our tithing jars down to the Christmas tree in case we opened an envelope and there was cash in it, because we had to tithe it instantly under the Christmas tree. My mom had extra change in dollar bills, So as a kid, I mean, that's very demoralizing, right? $5. Well, not really. Let me give you 4 ones and let me give you, I had to change it right there. So again, this kind of statement where it says, as you interpret it, of course, as a child, I couldn't do that, but you do have other voices, like perhaps a parent telling you what tithing should be, or a bishop or a leader or a spouse or, whoever for different reasons. So it is interesting that this kind of makes it sound like it's between you and the Lord, maybe you on your own faith journey. I actually love this.
I think it sounds that way. Let's see if the church thinks that too, right? So this is actually how I stumbled across the First Presidency letter. This is from a 2008 New Era article. It kind of repeats that first section again. But let's read the second paragraph. Landon, do you want to read it this time?
Yeah. Prayerfully, you want just the
Oh, start with, sorry, do in other words.
Okay. In other words, the way you define your income and consequently your tithing is a matter between you and the Lord. Prayerfully seek the Lord's guidance on issues like taxes, gifts, scholarships, and other matters to determine what qualifies as a full tithe.
Wow. Wow. I didn't have to take my tithing jar down to the Christmas tree and tithe the gift.
Not if you prayed about it and got the answer that, no, I don't. You could have said to your mom, I'm not taking my jar down. I prayed about it.
If this would have come out 40 years earlier in 1970, I could have taken this down and said, look, Mom.
A Merrier Christmas for Rebecca.
But the funny thing about that is because I always thought that was funny as you're a kid, you know, your grandma gives you $10 and they tell you, oh, you got to put $1 in the jar to give for tithing. But if grandma gives you a sweater, you don't like cut a tenth of the arm off and give it away, or you don't go get $1 and put it in because it's worth $10. You just take the sweater. So some reason cash
that's
is
in kind. Well, you know what's funny is that because my mom could tell, my tithing, like I said, I have a very dicey, very strong feelings about it. By the time I was in college and she was giving me money for things, she would give me the tithing to pay with it. So she goes, I'm going to give you $100, you know, to help with your tuition. I've put in 110 so that you can pay your tithing. Which is
Rebecca,
funny. What
is
about
that
the $10?
foreshadowing for how the church compensates the general authorities?
Yes.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
I want to mention one other thing from this. You know, so taxes, gifts, scholarships, and other matters. Okay, so again, we're explicitly expansive, and I want to plant a thought here about how about financial aid? Does it make sense for somebody, you know, receiving food stamps to go find a way to cash out 10% of their EBT card and give it to the bishop? No, in my opinion, absolutely not. You know, but you have all, you know, whether that's housing assistance, whatever. This starts to point to the surplus method because it's talking about basic needs, right? It kind of all converges in that being a valid method. But I have to tell you guys how I found this webpage on the church website, because it's a funny story, and it's kind of enlightening to the kind of the culture around this. So years ago, I was when I was serving as an executive secretary, I was assigned to as the local token bean counter. I was assigned to speak in sacrament meeting on tithing. And so, you know, I took another deep dive and I found this on the church website, and I was just blown away because it's so different from the gross net blessings nonsense that's the only other thing you ever hear. So I brought this question. Oh, and then also I had to give the spiritual thought one week in our bishopric meeting. So I brought this question forth. And all three men without fail said, yep. What do you want? Gross blessings or net blessings? Wow. Same basis, right? And to their amazement, I shared the actual church policy. And I was surprised that none of them had been trained on it. I thought certainly they should have, because they are the ones who are directing the members. You know, somebody's coming to them upside down with this methodology. And geez, Bishop, how is this supposed to work? Help me. And the bishop's not even trained on how to do it. So I was surprised they weren't trained. But anyway, they were all just like, oh, wow, yeah, I guess so, if that's what it says. But, you know, clearly they were kind of iffy on it.
Right.
And then the bishop just chuckled and said, don't tell anyone.
Yeah, we wouldn't want the members to know that they could make a personal decision that's best for them and their family and their spirituality. Because my thought is, how spiritual can you be if you're sitting there at church and you're desperately in your mind running through, what am I going to do? How am I going to get my rent? You know, or those financial concerns that are exasperated by, you know, having to pay that tithing on this certain level. So that's my thought. I think it's a direct detriment to spirituality if you have those. And I'm talking basic needs. There are people with those basic needs
Oh,
between tithing
absolutely.
and a basic need. And you can't think straight when you don't have your basic needs met, or you're concerned and you have kids and you're worried. I understand how that is, believe me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm not trying to throw poor Bishop under the bus either, because he loved the ward, he served the ward, his family sacrificed for him to do so, and he should be honored for that. But and in all fairness, I don't know if he was joking or if he was serious. But the reason that I don't know that is because, well, when it came time to give the talk, I shared this anyway because it was the right thing to do. And it made the bishop uncomfortable enough that he stood up afterwards and gave qualifying remarks after my talk. It's the only time that has ever happened to me. And just a bit about me. I don't mess around with garbage apologetics. I have no reservations whatsoever with calling out Pharisaical extremism or presenting an alternative view over the pulpit, which might be why I don't get up there too often. But yeah, this is the only time that's ever happened. And he didn't contradict what I said. He didn't really say anything of substance in particular at all, just kind of went in circles. And I think it just goes to show how entrenched people can be in a certain paradigm of orthodoxy, that even when you've got a declarative statement from the top governing body of the church that is explicitly expansive and open, it still makes you uncomfortable because it's going against the culture, right? That's the power of culture.
It's like a meme I made, a Trexmo. Of course, everybody knows I make Trexmos where one of the characters is looking at the computer and he says, anti-Mormon lies. And the person next to him says, that's literally the church website, which is like this, right? You found this on the church website, yet not that it's anti-Mormon lies, but it's something that the leadership was a little uncomfortable with you sharing in the way it was presented on the website and had to make, like you say, some clarifying statements. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And also just so nobody can, we want to steel man this, well, not steel man, but, I'm worried about the reverse, somebody making a straw man argument and saying, oh, this is over 50 years old. So, I mean, heaven knows they were saying other stuff around 1970 that we don't hold to today. Right. But this is an explicitly expansive statement that is currently, published as policy. It doesn't.
This is 2008. This article is 2008 with the same kind of statement.
Yeah. I hope to see this policy get more airtime. It needs to be out there, and so maybe this can help start that. I don't know.
I hope so.
So you knew we'd be coming to this guy.
There he is.
Yep. You referenced him before, and I apologize if anybody is triggered by this. I know I am. Can you believe this talk was almost 20 years ago? It's still raw enough that it feels like it could have been just a couple years ago or something like that. And I think the reason for that, this talk, tithing, a commandment even for the destitute. And we'll read the money statement in a second here, but I think the reason why this was so controversial and even hurtful to people is because we're all bringing the idea of gross to the table. And I'm not trying to make an apologetic and say that's not what Elder Robbins intended. That sits with him. This was at the very least a very insensitive delivery. But let's go ahead and read that. Rebecca, are we up to you now?
Yes, I think we're my turn here. So since I referenced it before, right? This is the talk that's going to live on. I think we all remember it. And it says tithing, a commandment even for the destitute. One of the first things a bishop must do to help the needy is to ask them to pay their tithing. Like the widow, if a destitute family is faced with the decision of paying their tithing or eating, they should pay their tithing. The bishop can help them with their food and other basic needs until they become self-reliant. And this is Elder Lyn G Robbins, 70, April of 2005 in General Conference. And I would say, I doubt that Elder Lyn G Robbins has ever been in that scenario to look his kids in the face and say, I don't know that I can feed you, but I'm going to give my money here. And I'm reminded of even more recently in Africa, some of the visiting authorities said the same thing. We need you to pay your tithing, to congregants that, may not be in a scenario where that's realistic. But I like what you're saying about the gross. I think that's why we all took that as such a gut punch. It's like, how am I going to do that? Because we all think gross. If we think surplus, we can do that because we're not terrified by not having our basic needs met.
Right. And if you, again, we're not making an apologetic here. We are just recontextualizing what Elder Robbins said and seeing how can we make this harmonious with the, with the overarching authoritative policy, right? Imagine if instead of this delivery, he had said, remember, members, you decide your tithing, even if that's just a symbolic dollar, because even that you can't afford. But you decide the amount. The Lord expects you to give something, and the church stands ready to assist you until you can stand on your own 2 feet.
Wow.
What if he had said that? Do you think that would have been received differently?
And I look at the last sentence there. He says, the bishop can help them with their food and other basic needs until they become self-reliant. Well, if they'd have taken that money and bought the food and didn't have to ask for the church to provide it because they bought it, they would be self-reliant. And therefore, like you said, you could say, I'm paying on my surplus, but I covered my needs first. That would be in line with what we just talked about, and you would be self-reliant by doing so.
And the problem is go ahead. Sorry, Aaron.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I've literally seen cases of that.
Yeah.
Where they're in that situation and the promised material blessings are not coming, and the pressure is mounting, and eventually they're like, well, the only reason I can't pay my bills is because I'm giving the money over here.
Yep. And if you took your finances to any financial advisor and they look through it, they would say, well, it's this part right here. You need to rethink, at least right now, your charitable giving, because your bottom line is being extremely negatively affected. So, and I also would say the idea that the bishop will help you become self-reliant, that's also a roulette situation. I can think in my own extended family over the years of a situation where, a child needed surgery, there was a job loss, they were turned away from any kind of even food help by a ward, right? And then another situation where there's a job loss and a bishop shows up and says, people in the ward, they donate these food cards. I don't have anyone to give them to. Here's $2,000 worth of food cards. So it's roulette. You don't know that you're going to be able to get that assistance. You don't know.
It is. And I mean, in my personal experience, I've seen bishops be generous to a fault. To where it's kind of shocking sometimes. They're like, you gave money to that guy, but here's the thing though, is that this isn't a long-term proposition, and bishops are not trained to assess financial situations. So they will inherently default to pressure over time. And that turns in, that sours, it doesn't fix things. A lot of these, you have some people who are just kind of a hot mess. It's life, but you have a lot of people who they don't get paid enough, and there's no easy way out of that, right? Or maybe they have unique needs. Like maybe you have a disabled family member in the home, and your needs are very different from a house that doesn't support that situation. Right. That's why we made that qualifier in the beginning. Needs are very important to assess.
Or maybe you had 8 kids like you were instructed, and now there's no way you can earn enough to pay them.
Yeah,
so you need the help from the bishop.
Yeah. And you have 8 kids and you're the sole breadwinner, and your kid. Yeah, no, and these are stories that play out over and over again. And a lot of it is silent suffering. A lot of families suffer with this, the stress and the guilt of not paying full tithing because they are trying to meet their needs, and they don't feel that these kinds of statements that you're bringing up can alleviate that silent suffering, because you can make these decisions, feel like you're good with supporting and sustaining your family, and you're also right with God. I mean, if that's your value, that you're going to pay tithing. So yeah, this is wonderful to hear. I wish this was more well known.
Often the most faithful will pay their tithing regardless of whether they can afford it. And then they're also the ones least likely to go ask the church for help. Instead, they'll rely on credit cards or money loan places, and all of a sudden they'll get themselves even deeper in debt where there's no way they can get out, all while trying not to be in this position.
Oh yeah, 100%. My wife and I floated credit card balances to pay tithing multiple times when we only understood gross, because that was all that was ever made known to us.
Yep.
You know, and it was weird too, because this was early on in my career, but I was from the gate, you know, we were, you know, it's not an extravagant life, but we were getting paid just a little over median income. And we were living in a very inexpensive part of town in a tiny little, you know, 1,400 square foot home, with just a really frugal budget. And my poor wife, I just, you know, put her through the ringer with all that so that we could make ends meet and you know, paying gross tithing, which we understood. And we would look at ourselves and just wonder, we're supposedly making above average. How on earth is this supposed to work for people who are below average?
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about. The silent
Is that
suffering.
miracle check literally just appearing out of nowhere every month? Because, you know, I feel like we're pretty close to that. I'm going to, you know, can we get one of those?
No, that's what I mean. People look around the board. I mean, these are people that seem like, oh, it's just regular, your middle income, whatever. No, there's like a lot of fear and a lot of suffering in people that they don't know, you know, how they can do tithing and also even support, like you said, their basic needs. And what you said about credit card balances, I've told this story before, but I can't not do this podcast and not tell it. So when I was first married, of course, like you said, we're making what seems to be okay, but then, you know, the realities are there. So I was a partial tithe payer for the first time in my life. And I went into my bishop, and I worked at BYU at the time. And I told my bishop, I'm really sorry. I'm a partial tithe payer, but I'm committed. We put together a budget. We're going to do better next year. And I thought he'd say, wonderful. But instead he said, you know, you work at BYU, and I'm going to have to call BYU, and I'm going to have to revoke your endorsement, and you're probably going to lose your job, which will really help the bottom line. Right. And so I said, oh, no, I have a credit card. I can put my tithing on it. And I did. I put my surplus, you know, over that to make myself a full tithe payer. I put it on the credit card, and I floated it for a while. But in that case, I was terrified. I was literally threatened with losing my job. I mean, it was terrifying.
Yeah. And the scripture comes to mind: no power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood. Only, you know, long suffering and all the good things.
Yeah.
Right.
No, but when they got your ecclesiastical endorsement in their hand, and they can yank it, and you have to clear out your desk the next day.
Right.
You have to do what you have to do.
This statement so they can say, I am full. And if they say, no, you're not. Yes, I am.
Yeah. And that's what I did from then on. I don't know why I told the truth that one time, because I never do, but that one time I did, and I learned my lesson. I just gaslit myself every other year to say, yeah, this is full, pretty close. I don't know.
No good deed goes unpunished, Rebecca.
Yeah, I know. Dang it.
All right, I'm glad you brought that up, Rebecca, about the suffering in silence. That's really my motivation for doing this, because that was us for the longest time. And I was only able to figure it out because of my profession and, you know, the places where I was placed to serve. I'd probably still be beating my head against a wall with this otherwise. And, you know, and this has real impact to families and faith. It's really important. And I want people to have a resource.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you talking about all this and using all faithful sources. You know, this is something that I think people can at least consider and maybe realize, why am I always thinking gross? Why am I always thinking that? Like your bishop that you brought it up to. Is there another way I can think that is backed up by faithful sources?
Yeah. And so again, we're going to go through the thought experiment back to our friend Elder Robbins. And we're going to look at, you know, since he's talking about that, well, they should pay their tithing and the ward can, and the bishop can help with assistance. Let's look and see what the church says about providing assistance. We've got a couple statements here. Oh, let me make sure I can toggle again. Okay. We've got a couple statements here from the General Handbook of Instructions, section 22.5 or 22.4, principles for providing church assistance. And Landon, I think we're up to you this time. That just the highlighted portion.
Okay, church assistance is intended to help members develop independence, not dependence. Any assistance given should strengthen members in their efforts to become self-reliant.
All right. And Rebecca, if you can read this one.
See, it says bishops should exercise good judgment and seek spiritual direction when considering the amount and duration of the assistance given. They should be compassionate and generous while not creating dependence.
So again, mic drop moment. You cannot create dependencies with these arrangements. Okay. Well, now let's entertain the thought of gross tithing. If I'm taking this big chunk here and moving it over here, and in order to make ends meet, the church is moving value over here in terms of paying my mortgage, my rent, my food, whatever. We're just moving money back and forth. And I have to wonder, what is the realistic short-term plan to get out of that arrangement, right? Because if you don't have one, what you have created here is a dependency, and it flies in the face of policy. It's also, again, going back to our chart there, where we said half of just the general population. So if the membership holds to that, which I've heard it does, if half of your ward is in that situation where they really need church assistance to be able to be full tithe payers, there is some administrative red tape. Of course, these resources are controlled. So how is a bishop supposed to effectively see to the needs of his flock while he is just, tied up in red tape, passing money back and forth with half the ward? That cannot be what the church's intent is. It makes zero sense at all. And I would also add that passing something back and forth is the same thing as not moving it at all. So again, this is boiling down to surplus.
Yeah, that almost sounds like Adam and Eve, where there's two contrary doctrines there. You can partake of the apple and live forever, and die, or you can live forever in glory, and Eve has to make a decision, Adam has to make a decision. Well, it's the same way. I pay my tithing and not be dependent on the church, or I pay my tithing and be dependent on the church, which I'm not supposed to do.
Yeah. And that's the sad part about this, is because you see it time and time again in the teachings, which again, they're just layered up on top of the actual authoritative basis that gets ignored. They're just skipping straight to faith. Tithing's a challenge. Have faith. Just do it. Right? Nobody is stopping and saying, hey, well, let's think about your calculation methodology. Right? Let's think about that first and then exercise faith.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, and there's another mindset at play here too, I think. And I'm reminded of a time we were at a Thrive giant event in Lehigh, and a man came in, he was sitting down. It was Dr. Stephen Hassan, who's the most practical, pragmatic. He's just wonderful, cult mind control. And a man came in that we didn't really know. There were about 300 of us there. And he's sitting in the back, and we're questioning to Dr. Hassan, and he raises his hand, and he's somebody who's faithful, but he's kind of there to stir the pot. And he starts talking about tithing, exactly what you're saying. And he's talking to Dr. Hassan about it, and Dr. Hassan is looking at it from a perspective of, oh, here's somebody who's under some kind of high demand, high control, scenario. And he's saying this kind of stuff that you're saying. I've given it to the church. I can't meet my needs, but I gave it to the church. And then his mindset is, by giving it to the church, I know that my bottom line will improve, I'll get a better job or something will happen. I'll get an inheritance. So it's like that prosperity gospel. I think that's why people keep doing it. They think something will happen. If you look at it on paper, it's not going to happen. You've given a huge chunk over here. You're over here trying to get money there. That's not going to be long term. But it's no different from watching a televangelist who says, do you need money? Give me your money and I'll send you the teardrop of Christ in a vial. And that's going to help you have prosperity. So I think that is, and I understand that. I have that. If I pay my tithing at great detriment to myself, something will happen. I will get a better job. I'll get in a better situation. My family long-term outlook will be better. And I think that's why people do it while on paper, like you said, it's no different from moving it back and forth. On paper, it doesn't work at all.
And here's the next part is going to help a lot with that idea, especially the scrupulosity angle, right? Because we are going to, we've talked about what the church teaches, and now we're going to show what the church models in its behavior through general authority compensation.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Well,
here we go.
Well, hold on. We don't want to jump to that. So just background for everybody, if there's somebody who doesn't know, the church prides itself on having a lay leadership. Right. And that's at the local level. Your bishops, stake presidents, leaders who are overseeing, rank and file members directly. They do that on a part-time basis, even though it probably adds up to full-time. But they do that in addition to whatever careers they have. They do not get paid for that service. So it's a little different at the highest levels of the church. They have chosen for them to be available 24/7, fully dedicated. And so, this is from the church website is what we're showing here, the FAQs. And the question is, do general authorities get paid? And so, Landon, we're back to you. Do you want to read those first two sentences?
Yeah. General authorities leave their careers when they are called into full-time church service. When they do so, they are given a living allowance, which enables them to focus all of their time on serving in the church.
Okay. Given their choice to have them available 24/7, I think paying a living allowance to the GAs is a sensible decision. Okay. But from that point, they kind of could have taken a couple different approaches. So if gross tithing is really the expectation, and members are supposed to exercise that logic-defying faith, then the church could have said, okay, well, we don't want that situation of do as I say, not as I do. So, Mr. GA, you left your executive job, and we're going to start paying you the median income for your region so that you can model the same level of faith that we expect from our members.
Mm-hmm.
So given the opportunity to display that faith, the church chose the pragmatic route of paying them high enough that those needs are absolutely guaranteed. And they are only exercising the faith to subordinate some of their wants, right? They put them squarely into that category where, like the proverbial dentist's wife, they can stand up at the pulpit and say, it's the easiest commandment. You get to keep 90%, right? Somebody who's just scrapping to make ends meet, they're like, I don't get to keep anything.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Let's get some more detail on this though. Because this has always been a known thing. It was just kind of tucked away because people didn't know the details until recent years. And here we've got a couple leaked documents. And I'll mention, as an active member, I don't take pleasure in furthering these, but at the same time, there's relevant information on here for members that I think, there should be transparency to some of this stuff. We should be declaring things like this is base GA compensation because it plays into that faith dynamic of with faith to sacrifice. What does God really expect of me? Because members are trying to sort that out for themselves. And without that, it definitely becomes a do as I say, not as I do situation. So it behooves the church just to be transparent with this. And since it's already out there, we're just going to dive into it. But yeah, so we've got a pay stub from President Eyring from 1999 that puts his compensation at the time, GA base compensation at 90,000 annually. And then we've got a pay increase letter from 2014 that puts compensation at 120,000. Okay, and I'm just going to skip ahead quick. If we take that data and then we can make the reasonable assumption that, an annual increase generally to keep up with inflation is going to be somewhere between 2 and 3%. So we could extrapolate that to be somewhere in the range of 145 to 160,000 a year. And then of course there are benefits on top of that we don't know exactly what those are, but they're rumored to be quite generous. The point is that GAs are very comfortable with where they sit. So do you guys remember when these leaks came out?
I do. Yep.
Do you remember how people reacted?
Yeah, I thought of my parents who always told me, that the church leaders gave up everything to serve. They may have had jobs and careers before, and now they kept saying without purse or script. So I really was taught to believe that they really, at great personal sacrifice of their own, were serving. So then I came to BYU and I started to learn more about the culture and the upper echelon of Mormonism in Salt Lake. And, there were some roommates that were dating general authority sons, things like that. And I started to understand that it's a culture of affluence, that my parents never, ever would have understood at all or expected, but it definitely existed. So when I saw these pay stubs, I wasn't surprised, but I know someone like my parents would be floored. And I don't think they know about it to this day. They'd be stunned because they really think without purse or script, these humble, wonderful men, which I'm sure they are humble, wonderful men, but they're also being compensated. And there's affluence there more than the common member, especially perhaps in other countries where they go and say, give me your money.
Right. And just to be fair, again, I'm not trying to make an apologetic here, but just trying to, when this came out, there was a lot of hurt and there was a lot of anger, because certainly these men and their families could be getting by on less. But as to the question of unjust enrichment, generally they are leaving careers where they're making more. Yeah. But let's be real here. What are they giving up there? Are they giving up needs or are they giving up wants? Right. But until that kind of gets flipped on its head and and by and large, they're making more by going to church service, I'm willing to suspend judgment as to the question of unjust enrichment. And let's just look at the behavior and see, because they're setting the example for the rank and file membership. What are we to glean from that and apply to ourselves? Right. Just, so I guess just enough apologetics to do that, turn it into a positive place.
No, it's legitimate. That's absolutely right. But I think in some cases, people who have never had to struggle with a need and only wants, they can't imagine what it is to actually have a need, like a security need, a food security or a shelter security need. That is a real thing, even in places you would not expect it, even in people in your ward that don't look like that is something that they're worried about, food or shelter, necessity, security. So I do understand it's probably hard for people that they've had to think about giving up wants, but could never fathom actual needs sometimes have to be compromised.
Yeah, my car keeps breaking down and I'm in danger of losing my job, and then everything goes to crap. Like,
that's what I'm talking about.
If you haven't lived in that situation, then the gospel of Christ demands that you step into those shoes and don't go a mile, you go twain, right?
Yep.
You really lean into that and see where the other people are coming from before you just flippantly tell them to exercise faith.
Yeah, that's
because you have no idea what you're even talking about.
No, and you're right. It's usually a cascading thing like that. Like if you say, Bishop, I can fix my car or pay my tithing. Well, pay your tithing. And you don't understand that cascade of needs. My car can't get me to work. I'll lose my job. I'll lose my food. That is a reality for some people, for many more people than you would ever think. So, but if you're not exexperienced in that and you don't see it, of course, just pay your tithing. It'll work out. Something will happen for your car.
And they come by it honestly, right? That's
exactly.
the orthodoxy, filling that void. And it's always worked for me. Why wouldn't it work for you?
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, one thing I want to point out about this before we move on the iRing pay stub, notice that he's totaled up those lower three items, which are the non-reimbursable items. So that's what he's calling income, and then he's calculated a 10% gross tithing off of that. Okay. Now some people look at this and they're like, okay, well, see, ha ha ha, joke's on you, critics who are celebrating this leaked pay stub, because all we're doing is establishing gross income. Okay, well, we're going to look a little bit closer at that.
yeah,
And
Yeah,
I think
so
you
we
had a
got-
comment, Landon, before we
Oh,
went
yeah,
on.
go
Sorry,
ahead,
I think
Landon.
this is such a hot topic. We all have everything we want to say. So what was your comment?
Well, I was just going to say, I know a lot of people out there are going to say, well, $140,000 isn't that much for that type of a position of that type of leadership, which I agree. That's not an immense amount. However, I don't believe this by any amount even comes close to what their full compensation. I think all their kids get to go to BYU for free. People that they get a car. Their house is a patronage. They don't have to pay taxes on those. They get free tickets to the Jazz game. Everywhere they go, people feed them. They don't, so there's a lot of other costs here. They write a book. That's probably not figured into this salary, and everybody buys it. So the salary is much larger than what is shown on here. This is just the base pay that they get. But I don't want to take away from what you're saying. So
yeah, no, that's great. But and to your point, this isn't even intended to be fair compensation. It's meant to be a living allowance.
yeah,
That is very, very important for what we're about to get into. Okay, so I titled this, the beloved children's primary song, right? Do as I'm doing, follow me. We should feel empowered to follow the example of the leaders. I think that is just a base value that general truth and goodness would agree with. And so I don't want, again, I'm a numbers guy. I don't want non-numbers people to just be turned off by this slide. I've got a few different scenarios here. And the point is, we've got this variable income type. And that is, when you see that, I want you to think the general authorities, because the church controls their income and the church controls tithing, right? So this gets back to your grandma giving you enough birthday or Christmas money that you can pay tithing on top of it. Well, that's what the church is doing, right?
Yeah.
The church said, by virtue of this being a generous living allowance that is meant to cover everything with no fuss, no full guarantee, right? That is a targeted net that they are trying to land on to do that. So they're adding tithing to the gross, or they're grossing up using tithing just so it can be backed out. And I added this crazy method to kind of illustrate that point for everybody. So this isn't something that the church does by any stretch, but just use your imagination for a second, and imagine that the church said, well, we want our leaders to demonstrate a higher law. So even though we're compensating them, they're paying 90% tithing, right? Well, in order to, that sounds big and everything, but in order to do it, the church would have to pay each one of them over $1 million. Yeah. And everyone would just be like, but you're just passing money back and forth. Let's see straight through it, right? It gets to a point where it's just comical. And so people can see that you can take this back in the other direction. And that's where we get again at the surplus method. Okay. So, just the loose calculation I have here, if your targeted net in this case is 108,000, what difference is it if you pay them 120 and they pay back 12 versus paying them? You could have just paid them a lower amount and had them calculate it differently, right? So when you see Iring's paycheck calculating gross, it doesn't matter. It's just, they control all the inputs. Now on a fixed income, that's your rank and file members. I don't know about you guys, but I can't, my income is what it is. I can't just, make my paycheck say something different. Okay. And so for us, when we calculate tithing, it comes up with very different results depending on which method you use, which I'm illustrating here, gross and surplus. These are really just, one point on that curve that we were looking at before. But I just wanted to illustrate a case where, again, surplus is leaving you with something to exercise discretion over. gross is putting you into mathematical impossibilities. And those are the defining characteristics of these methods. Gross is just putting tithing above all else, and it's just, faith to, math defying faith. Whereas a surplus, any time that we are prioritizing needs and subordinating wants, even if your math is gross, it could also be manifested as surplus. That's what it is, and that's what the church is modeling.
Wow, I love that, math defying faith, because that's exactly, everybody pay attention to those two charts at the bottom. Needs deficit, you will always be behind. There was an article that came out recently that said Utah is the #1 state that has the most abysmal retirement numbers as far as what people have been able to save. And I feel like this faith-based, or tithing, it's, I think that's the cause of it, because look right there, you can see you're never going to get ahead with that gross method. You're always going to be in a needs deficit.
Yeah.
That's very, very enlightening and disheartening, because I know a lot of people that are always going to pay on their gross, and that's scary.
Yeah. And that comes at the cost of other things, sadly. But yeah, I think we've kind of beat this idea up enough to really show that the church's boundaries and options are actually a lot more expansive than what people generally think. So now for the next part, I've kind of titled this "Making It Work." These are things to think about kind of inside that box. Things that people can think about. Where do I want to actually land on things? Anything else? Anything, Landon, before we move on?
No.
All right. Okay. So this first part is costs of income. Now, anybody who owns their own business, they're already very well aware that what your customer gives you is not what you take home at the end of the day. You've got all kinds of expenses coming out first, right? Salary and wage earners typically don't think that way, right? It's gross paycheck. But you can think of yourself as a business that sells your services to your employer. And I've listed a few of these. We've got education and student loans, transportation, licensing, clothing and equipment, or maybe if you work from home, you've got, you have to have internet for that. And again, listeners, if you can think of anything else, go ahead and throw that in the comments. We want people to, just really get the juices flowing.
So these are things that allow you to do your job, to even at the bare minimum allow you to do your job. And I think you've joked about that before with your turbo tithing, Landon, where you've said you would be able to take these as deductions. I can't do my job without paying for the internet. I've got to wear clothes to my job. I have to do that. So if you think about it in terms of how you would prepare your tax return, this is a really smart way to think about it.
And business owners all the time move stuff that they probably should pay tithing on, and they move it into their business, and then it's a business expense and not a personal income for exactly this reason. I'll have the business buy the car, and I'll drive the business's car, and now I don't have, where I, as a fixed income earner, I have to pay my car out of what I make. They have a car, and it's not reflected in their salary, so they're not paying on it.
Yeah, don't even get me started on the funny business that people do through their personal.
I'm sure you've seen it all.
Yeah, but think about it. If you didn't have this misunderstanding to begin with, there's no motive to do it.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention too, because I know there's going to be somebody orthodox in the comments who's saying that, well, you don't even understand the purpose of tithing. If you're approaching it like this, then you're not giving with a willing heart, and you're nickel and diming the Lord and whatever. Okay. Again, this is why it's so important to keep the example of the general authorities in context and think about what does their example show is worthwhile uses of limited resources, right? And what type of sacrifices are they making in their service? And because I would mention just transportation, for example, a daily commute into work that can easily cost $3,000 a year just with fuel and tolls, right? So for some families, the $300, 10% of that, right? That $300 could be their Christmas budget, or it could be a much needed family vacation for bonding. It could be a child's music lessons, or it could be any number of other worthwhile pursuits that we're going to get into shortly. And so when you look at the general authorities, are they making that sacrifice? Well, no, they're not, right? They're subordinating wants. That's really what we're seeing from them. And so you've got to be careful if you are imposing that upon yourself or especially others.
Yeah,
Anything else on this one?
That's really good.
Okay, so the next one, this one's fun. And I gotta apologize. I didn't notice until late that they're holding guns.
Oh,
Those are squirt guns. They're shooting water on the hamburgers.
Okay, all I did
it's
was
marinade gun.
I just put in a Google search for the American Dream, and I'm beginning to think that maybe this is one of your AI pieces, Rebecca.
Could be. I don't know. Oh my, I would never have noticed that had you not said it. That is so, or maybe the meat isn't quite dead yet and they're just going to take care of it. They're on the grill. This is great.
Yeah, but yeah, so I guess while we talk about the American Dream, we can poke fun at ourselves too.
Yep.
We probably need a disclaimer at this point. Kids don't barbecue with guns.
Do not barbecue with guns.
Yeah,
Everyone.
yeah. 10 feet away at all times, minimum.
That is hilarious. Oh my gosh. Even the dog has a gun, I think. No.
Yeah. So yeah, this section is inflation and economic value. And since tithing is based on income, really what we're talking about here is buying power, right? Which any parent who has had to buy their kid something in an amusement park is very well aware of that concept. But honestly, I think everybody knows about inflation these days, right? The past few years, with all the money that they pumped in during COVID to prop up the economy through the pandemic, it worked for that. But now those hens have come home to roost, and we've had pretty steep inflation the last few years. So I've got an example here just to kind of illustrate how this plays into how people should maybe think about their tithing. So imagine somebody they're getting paid $4,200 a month, right? So easy math, gross tithing on that, $420. Now imagine that in the next year, they get a 5% raise. Okay, now they're making $4,400. Well, gross would say that, okay, now you're paying $440 in tithing, right? Here's where the economy shows that to be an oversimplification. If that is in an inflationary period, like here we're saying monthly rent for that person actually went up 20%. Okay, well, because your costs have gone up faster than your income, in terms of buying power, you didn't get a raise at all. You're getting paid less in value than you were before. How on earth does it make sense to pay more tithing when you're getting paid less? Right? It doesn't. So these when you start thinking about all of that, prices fluctuate over time. They accumulate over generations and geographical differences, right? I mean, try throwing somebody from LA and Oklahoma City into a room and saying, tell us how much a house should cost, right? They're not going to be able to do that. Or somebody and their parent and grandparent, you guys need to come tell us what's the proper price for a jug of milk, right? It's so subjective. They're not going to be able to do it. And so there's kind of a rule of thumb that you can do with this is if you're comfortable with where you're paying tithing, you can kind of just assess how your situation feels. You don't need to spread everything out like your neighbor, Rebecca, and go over it to the penny, right? You can just kind of judge, has your standard of living changed? If not, maybe you just keep doing what you've been doing if you're good with it. But the thing I want people to realize that if you take that approach, it's very sensible, but really you're using personal license and planting a flag in something arbitrary. Because really what this points back to is nobody can say how much this stuff should cost. So it points to the surplus method. Wherever you are, whenever you are, it costs what it does. Right?
This is great. My kids are at the point, they're young adults starting families, and they're trying to save to get into a house, or they were 2 or 3 years ago. And the price of housing has just gone up so exponentially that their income they can't save enough to put the down payment down because the house keeps going up in value. And so that's exactly what we're seeing here. And you do have to make that. And it's interesting. I look at year one here and I look at when I was a faithful believing member, I would look at this and I would say, oh, look, I paid my tithing and I got a 5% raise this year. I was blessed for paying my tithing. But I look at this and I just paid $420 to be blessed with $200, of which really that ended up that I'm now paying $440 for that $200 increase of blessings. It doesn't line up. You're actually further behind. You weren't blessed. You actually are making less, but you're saying, oh, I was blessed with a 5% raise, not knowing that you're really making less money.
And if you were feeling the pinch before, you're really going to feel it now.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably don't even understand why. You think, wait, I don't get it. I paid my tithing. I was blessed with a raise. Why now suddenly my bottom line doesn't look like it used to? Yeah. I mean, unless you're like you, Aaron, you can't, not everybody can crunch it like that and really see the reality of it. On paper, it looks a certain way, but that's not the reality.
And then right in the middle of that, you have another baby and you're making less now and you've got more
your wife
expenses.
quits her part-time job because you had another baby. And now you're like, why am I so stressed out as I sit here at church and panicking inside?
Well, and she quit her job because you guys are trying to do what, the prescribed lifestyle. And
100%. Yeah. Landon and I talk about that a lot, especially being people that are in our 50s. When I did that, I quit my job after my second child and went home to be the stay-home mom. And you don't think about what that means long-term because where's my 401k? It's not, because I went home and I was a stay-at-home mom, for 20 years with my kids. So it's, and you think you're doing what's right, but it's very interesting.
And just to plant a seed for later, because we'll be talking about blessings, it's very important for people to decide, to be able to have the freedom to see the hand of God in their own life or not see it, if they don't feel like they're being blessed and that's a bad fruit, there's a scriptural basis for them reacting to that accordingly. But back to what you're saying, Landon, that was actually our next slide is home values. Okay. We talked about generational differences. So I went to the Fed and I pulled some data going back to 1963. This is the median. This is the median. This is the median home price, and median income, both indexed to 1. So what this chart is showing is just the relative changes over time. And as you expect, everybody knows that slow inflation just kind of goes up gradually. And that's that blue line. That's the median income just gradually raising. Until about 20 years ago, home prices were kind of following the same pattern. So in that case, whether you bought your home in 1963 or 1999, you had a pretty similar experience generationally. So, so one person talking to another across that time, it's very relatable. Right? In terms of, the dollars are different, but it feels the same. Okay. The last 20 years, that has not been true. Okay. You see that, and you see where that red line takes off. The first bump, that's the subprime mortgage housing bubble and the housing crisis. So it goes down, but then it starts going up again. And so I can tell people, just based on my professional background, what we're in right now, it's slowing down a little bit. This data only goes to 2021. It's slowed down definitely because of actions by the Fed. But this is not a bubble. The credit quality of current real estate, just mortgage loans that are out there, people are paying their loans. These are good loans that are out there. It's not going to come crashing down anytime soon. This huge spike that we're seeing right there with home values just being out of reach and unaffordable, well, that's a reality. It's not just a temporary issue. And that gets really problematic when you have somebody from, if you've got someone from the baby boomer generation or even earlier, because, the church is, a gerontocracy and the leadership is historically old right now. If they're trying to say, well, my experience was this, it should work for you. We have reasons here, exactly this, why it's different. And people need to be, again, I'm not saying that someone should or shouldn't say this, that, or the other. That's just out of control. People are going to do it. But people who are talking and people who are listening need to be very cautious when these conversations go over generational or geographical boundaries, right? Because that pinch that people are starting to feel in Utah now, California's been dealing with it for ages, right? And did they have the personal license to, maybe, but I doubt it.
No, that's a very real thing, because I remember when I was working and I had 2 little kids, and I remember hearing a talk. I don't remember who gave it. This would have been in the late 90s. And it was like, I was at my job. We were in our home, and mother, he called his wife mother, was at home with the kids, and she was baking. And I'm just like, what reality is that? I'm working overtime at my job. I've got my kids in daycare. We're, it was not my reality whatsoever. And so you're absolutely right. Just because it was your reality, and even people our age have to, like you said, Landon, your kids and my kids are not doing what we did, even trying to get a home. They can't. We have to understand that. And it's graphs like these are really important to help us be more empathetic. And then you throw tithing into that mix, and parents that are saying to their kids, well, just pay your tithing, then you'll get a home. And they're saying back to you, you don't get it. You don't understand. We don't understand. It was not our experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's so, this is all the American dream, and it's sadly out of reach for most of the up and coming generation. Yeah. The next section, and this is probably my favorite part of the whole thing. Okay. This is competing stewardships. All right. And we put our chart back on here with a twist. We'll come to that. This is the tithing curve that we talked about before. And we are asked, as members of the church and as Christians generally, we are asked to do a lot of different things, right? And these are noble causes, and they take resources. So again, just what I've listed, a generous fast offering, continued courtship, food storage, humanitarian aid, savings, and child rearing. That's all on top of, just the generic day-to-day needs. And I can tell you, my wife and I have sat through all the lessons during those years when we were just so hand to mouth. And it was not fun hearing about all of these expectations, knowing that it's impossible because we're paying tithing. The numbers are not there. I wish so I have to take solace in that whole, I give not because I have nothing or whatever. But the truth is, we did have something that we could have given to these areas. And I really wish that we would have figured that out earlier on and done some good in those areas. And one that I want to circle on now, because I know we kind of said this is out of scope. It's really a gradient issue. But humanitarian aid, right? That is a very hot topic right now in light of the, the EPA holdings and all that. There's a lot of feelings in that area. Jana Reese recently said that she's giving her tithing directly. That's outside the scope of what we're talking about, but, kudos to her for following her conscience and taking that personal license. If I can just say a couple words to that, I had a really good example from this, with my twin brother. So I mentioned that I served a mission in Hungary, and at the same time, my twin brother was next door in Romania serving his mission, and he's just a genius and a concert violinist and overall gem of a human being. And anyway, years later, while we're back in the States, one day he ran into this man playing violin at a street corner for money. And so he's already got that instant connection of the violin. So he goes up and he gives him, $5 or whatever. And they get to talking and finds out that he's from Romania. And he'd recently immigrated with his whole family. And they're able to have this beautiful connection. My brother's able to even give more assistance to the family that they needed. And the only reason he's able to do that is because he had the resources to do it, right? We are asked to be the Good Samaritan, And that type of moment right there. We have a hymn about that, right? Opportunities right in our way. Do not let them pass by, saying, someday I'll try. Go out and do something today. What a beautiful sentiment. That is not the type of thing that a large, bulky institution can do. There are other humanitarian efforts that a large, bulky institution can do very well, but that boots on the ground, what did we say? The Good Samaritan scenarios. The church can't do that effectively. And you can't do it at all if you don't have anything left.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I always tell this story when we talk about tithing, but I think a lot of members think by giving to the church that, it's the best, easiest way to do it. And they don't have to recognize things right in front of their face. And I tell the story of being a kid on Temple Square with my dad, and my dad who paid 10% fast offering and another 10% to all the different aid, the perpetual education, all that. I think they literally paid about 30% of their income their whole life to the church. And yet on Temple Square, when a homeless person and a real person held out his hand to my dad, he said, no, I give to the church. It's okay. You can go to them for help. I walked on past. It had a huge impact on me because I tell this story. What would you say? Probably every other podcast, Landon.
Yeah, I think so.
Landon's like, we're tired of this story. But it represents a lot because my dad is incredible, so generous. And yet he did not see a person right in front of him. He had just given to an institution. So you're right. And especially for someone that doesn't have the leftover resources to help a person right in front of them because they have paid on gross or whatever. It's a very valid scenario, your brothers and my dad. So I appreciate you bringing it up.
And when people find out that what they believed to be happening isn't happening, that has triggered faith crisis.
Yep.
It's a very serious issue. And, another one too that we'll mention is the GoFundMes, right? Yeah. You're on Facebook and somebody got cancer. Somebody was in a horrible car accident, and if you can't help them because it's all going over here and then it's on a money pile, what a horrible feeling that is, and again, you can find a way to balance that of saying, like, I still need to do my Christian duty. I can, I'll let you do you, church. I'm not going to say you need to do X, Y, and Z with the money, but I've got to do my Christian duty, right? People can play that and do what is right. Let the consequence follow.
Yeah.
I will say that's been one of the great blessings for me since I have left the church, is the fact that I now have that income that I can give as I see fit. And whereas I gave it to an institution and I saw absolutely no result when I gave it to them, I gave it out of duty, that I was supposed to pay my tithing. And now when I see somebody who really needs it, I can say, I've got the extra. I can pay something here, or I can give something here. Mm-hmm. And I know exactly who it's helping. That really changes your giving mind, your mind as you're giving it, when you see the actual result of what you're doing.
And you have that connection. And I will say to everybody, Landon is very generous in this way. Whenever we're all out together, he's like, oh, I've got that. Or here, do you need some gas money to somebody who's younger? Or here, I'll do. I mean, he's incredibly generous like that. And just the human connection you've mentioned before, Landon, when you're actually interacting with the person, you see what it does, and you feel amazing and they feel amazing. And it's just a whole different experience. I think when you pay tithing, sometimes it's like, whew, all right, I did it. I was able to do it. I handed in my money, very different when you're able to just organically come across a scenario like your twin brother and then be able to help.
There's an entirely different feel of the peace of compliance versus the joy in doing something that just inherently feels good. Mm-hmm. And we are taught to interpret that good as, as divine confirmation that what you did was right. So that's something that's amiss that can only be aligned by taking that personal license. Yeah. And so, I got to mention why I put this chart back on here. I wanted this here for context, and I added this line of residual surplus after gross tithing. It's going to be hard to explain this one to listeners only. So jump on the YouTube if you're at this point, but it's really just the inverse of gross. You got the two curved lines mirroring each other, and that's there just to show like what you have left over when you're paying gross tithing. And so you have this area of high incomes where, again, it doesn't make any difference to you, right? You've been blessed with such resources that it doesn't matter. That is not true at the lower end of the graph. And so you've got to be so careful the way that you talk about this across the income spectrum. Because there is someone there suffering in silence. They're ashamed of their position, or they're confused as to why the blessings aren't flowing. Why isn't it working? All sorts of things down in that range. And so that introduces this idea of, why are you seeking to reconsider your tithing amount? If it's like, ooh, I just figured out, I just listened to this Mormonish podcast, and now the surplus method. Oh boy, I just figured out if I do surplus instead of gross, I can turn my 4-week European vacation into a 5-week European vacation. Right? That's that's a very different thing than someone at the lower end who's like, my child needs a productive activity, and I couldn't afford, the youth soccer league. Mm-hmm. or piano lessons, even though I felt like they need that. But now I have the framework for justifying, for following my conscience in that area. People should be thinking about that, and so what I like here, we probably can't get this awful gross blessings, net blessings saying to go away, but maybe we can get need versus greed to catch on, right? Because that's really what people need to be thinking about as they apply these different methodologies. When you're talking about competing stewardships, your funds, wherever you sit on the spectrum, are a limited resource. And how are you putting them to good work? Right? That is a matter of personal conscience, and it should play into a tithing calculation, in my humble opinion.
Aaron, I want to point out that you're missing something on this slide, and I forgive you because you're young.
Sure.
But missionary service on here, especially when you said you and your brother were both serving, that's a huge output, huge. $1,000 for a family. So
yeah, that really is.
Yep, it's a reality. We've all been there. Those mission expenses. So, and I'm sure there's more that we're not thinking of either. List them off in the chat. I'm sure there's others we haven't come up with.
In the comments. Yeah. And another thing to think with this too, I put on here like acute versus long-term. As a ward clerk, I have seen a lot of assistance checks for emergency vehicle repairs. What you don't see is routine maintenance, which will be a lot more sensible. And so again, when you're in the realm of carrying a credit card balance too, you're probably not like fixing your brakes timely. Mm-hmm. Okay. Or you're probably not getting that weird mole checked, right?
Or dental work. You're putting it off until something horrible happens, and then you need help.
Yeah. Yep. And eventually it blows up, and heaven forbid, it grows into something that was preventable and now is not. Or you get in a car accident, right? These are still needs that people should be mindful of.
Yeah, but maybe you will say, I had the car accident, or I had the mole, or I had the tooth crack because I wasn't paying my tithing. See, there's all that psychology that you do to yourself. Bad things because I didn't pay as much as I was supposed to, or good things because I did. It's that scrupulosity, and it's a cycle. It's hard to get out of.
It's there. Even if, I consider myself a pretty rational person, and I can't technically rule any of that out. So it still bounces around in my head. And I'm just like, no, that's not how this works.
So get a grip, Aaron, talking to yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, just a couple sections left here. This one, we said we'd talk about sacrifice and blessings. And here I've got another picture from the church website. This is the story of Abraham and the sacrifice of Isaac. And can one of you tell me in the picture what's going on in the background there?
It looks like the angel. Is he trying to stop Abraham, or is he trying to help him?
I think that's the angel of the Lord stopping the sacrifice.
I think he's saying, you've done enough. It's okay.
Yeah, you don't have to do it.
So Abrahamic sacrifice gets invoked literally, and sacrifice is just so pedestalized And it's bizarre because we end up talking out of both sides of our mouths because we say, pay, there will be blessings, right? And then if the blessings don't come, you're like, well, it's sacrifice anyway. So we forget that, again, this is how the Orthodox interpret it. Abrahamic sacrifice, it is forgotten that Isaac was spared upon the altar.
Mhm.
Okay. And this is something, again, I'm not a scriptorian. I'm just a regular old member. But in my honest reading of scripture, you see a lot of competing ideas. You've got orthodoxy on one side and pragmatism on the other. And these create a healthy tension for balancing the strengths and compensating the weaknesses of the other, right? When you sever ties on one of those, it becomes either an anything goes situation,
Mm-hmm.
or just, you just steamroll over all the bad fruits that come from stuff that just doesn't make a lick of sense. And we drift into these, pharisaical positions like I consider us to be in right now on tithing.
Yeah, and
right?
either one is a bad scenario, either way. And you could look at this in terms of tithing and say, look, he had the intent to do what he could do, and as he interpreted, he was supposed to do. And you could look at that with tithing. I have the intent. I'm going to do what I can do in a way that I can do it. So
Yeah.
everyone will be okay. No one needs to die on the altar of tithing. Let's just say that, meaning that you sacrifice everything else in your life and your comfort and sanity. You don't have to die on that tithing altar.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just really one example of many issues. I mean, pick your issue in the church, and it probably applies. We hear often, don't study the ark, and that's the scriptural reference. Therefore, the conversation's over. But can we talk for a second about Moses having his arms held up?
Yeah.
I mean, again, we have opposing differences. Can we talk about Mary and Martha and choosing the better part? Right? It's just very easy to steamroll over actual issues with sacrifice and blessings. And to the blessings point, we've got to give a little bit of airtime to that. Here we've got Wendy Nelson. She explicitly says, when we're desperate to have more money, we eagerly follow the Lord's law of finances, which is, of course, tithing. And then she goes on to tell the George Q. Cannon story, right? Rebecca, do you mind reading that second highlighted part?
Yeah, I remember this. Consider President George Q. Cannon's approach to tithing when he was an impoverished young man. When his bishop commented on the large amount of tithing poor young George was paying, George said something like, "Oh, Bishop, I'm not paying tithing on what I make. I'm paying tithing on what I want to make." And the very next year, George earned exactly the amount of money he had paid tithing on the year before. And these are the kind of stories that make you feel like crap if you're sitting in the pew and your spouse has lost his job and you're still paying tithing and you're like, I'm terrified inside and I'm not getting the blessings. So these are really difficult to read.
Yeah, I mean, if we follow that logic to its natural end, tithing becomes the greatest investment vehicle of all time. We can just keep pumping it in and growing it.
It's called prosperity gospel. Send me your money and I'll send you a sliver from the cross. And then you hold on to that and you'll get that job.
Yeah. And somebody go ahead, put it in the comments if I'm wrong, but I did not ever see this talk put back in its proper place. Yeah. It was just out there.
Yeah.
And it's damaging.
Well, and it's interesting if you look at the first line where she says, when we're desperate to just have more money. That sounds like someone's like, I just wish I had more money. It's not you're desperate to have more money. You're desperate to have security, food security, shelter security, medical care security. It's not just money as she refers to it as.
The word desperate goes along with your basic needs. You're only desperate for basic needs. You don't get desperate over having to have a Porsche,
Right. I wish I had some money. Yeah.
But the desperation is also here and now.
Yeah.
It isn't someday. It isn't in the hereafter. It's a here and now temporal blessing that they're dangling.
Yep.
And that's, to me, that's reckless.
And that's true. He's not desperate if he didn't get the money for another year. Then he wasn't really desperate.
He wasn't desperate. Nope.
Yeah. And then the next one I put in there, this is the Valerie Cordone story where he he says his dad, his business is failing and they don't have any money, and he's watching his dad to see what he does, and his dad hands over the tithing envelope, and then he's wondering, what are we going to eat? Right. And then the next morning, some people knocked on our door. They told my dad that they needed uniforms right away. So again, they got this immediate response. And like I was saying when we were talking about this before, I would never want to undertake to persuade someone away from seeing the hand of God in their prosperity. But a law is a law because of its consistency, right? I mean, Wendy Nelson called it the law of finances, right? I mean, imagine if the law of gravity only worked sometimes. Do you think you'd just go willy-nilly about, in the streets? You might want to be tethered to something if you could just go flying off at any moment, right?
That's a good point.
It's fine that, the prosperity gospel is a very complex, idea, and people ought to feel like they're being blessed without turning around and just feeling like they can say that that's going to happen for somebody else. Because the reality is, it could be true. It could just be, something that we don't understand. It could be coincidence.
Well, the child in a poor country whose father paid tithing and didn't get a blessing, and they were on the brink of death, and kid does die because they starved to death, that kid doesn't get up in conference and give the story.
You're not going
of
to
what
hear
happened.
that story.
Only the one that it was successful for is left. Yeah.
Yeah, usually not to that extreme, but
right.
I mean, but they are stories according to what they're dangling, right? And this often becomes a heads I win, tails you lose situation, because if the blessing doesn't come, then there are other responses to that. And to that point, I want to reference President Nelson's Think Celestial talk from last year. Rebecca, can you read that? I don't know whose turn we're on.
Just the highlighted or the whole thing?
Yeah, just the highlighted part.
Okay. He says, I attribute several subsequent professional opportunities to our faithful payment of tithes. Yes, I remember that.
Okay, so I appreciate the way that President Nelson worded this, that he is taking personal ownership of seeing it that way.
He saw it that way.
Okay,
yes.
but and I'm going to give credit to Nemo because he's the one who pointed this out. We've got a footnote. Okay, Landon, you want to read the footnote?
This is not to imply a cause and effect relationship, even though it just did. Some who never pay tithing attain professional opportunities, while some who pay tithing do not. The promise is that the windows of heaven will be open to the tithe payer. The nature of the blessings will vary.
Okay, so how does that square with what his wife said earlier?
Yep.
Yeah,
it doesn't. Yeah. Not at all. Yeah, it's funny how I wonder, he gave the talk, and I wonder if the lawyers are like, we got to add a footnote, because people hang on the prophet's words, of course, and they're going to dive even more into that prosperity gospel. Even though I think you're right, he did word it in a way in which he said, I personally took that as the hand of God in my life. He personally made that. But when the prophet says that, people are going to say, ooh, so yeah, I guess it was the responsible thing to do, to put that footnote in, but who clicks on a footnote? I don't know.
Well, nobody. That's the problem. One thing is being said to all the millions, and another thing, like, next to nobody's going to see.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And we can't act as though like, oh, it's all just put out there in the same format.
Right.
To me, this footnote doesn't even, the language and tone is completely different. This does, to me, sound like something that the lawyers are like, our lawsuits are mounting. We need to have a disclaimer out there so we can say we're not promising the prosperity gospel.
The Lord's not really promising what he's promising.
It's like it should have been read really quickly, like on a radio. After he says it, a voice comes in on conference. This is not to imply that this is.
Yeah. And we're just bringing up
conditions may vary, may apply.
Sacrifices, blessings, faith, these all end up being doctrinal plugs that just get shoved in there.
Right.
To when things don't make sense. And I just, in the name or in the spirit of empowering personal discernment, we just want people to know, like, there's some conflicting advice going on here. And so you need to be careful with, how you apply it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And
just
again,
to
it's
have
the
the
people that
full
have
lay of the land.
it's the people that have the scrupulosity that are going to read these statements by Wendy and they're just going to hand over all their money. It's the people
Yeah.
that have the religious scrupulosity. Other people more level-headed are going to go, I'm going to check this out. But there are people, the same kind of people that sometimes are like serial confessors, people that just take these statements at such face value and they're compelled to do what they're told when other people say, okay, this is good, I'll take this into consideration. So unfortunately, it is the people that have religious scrupulosity that'll look at that face value and put themselves in a bad situation, maybe unintentionally.
And I can't tell you how many people I've had conversations with on this topic who will say that they'll claim one of those success stories, and because they do happen, right? And then I always ask them, like, okay, but do you think that happens for everybody?
Yeah.
Because I tell them I've been a ward clerk a million times, and I've seen lots of cases where it doesn't. And I'm not trying to be argumentative, but how do you explain that? Right?
Well, you can say the same thing. Have you ever had a time when you paid your tithing and you didn't get the raise or the job
Then it was a
opportunity that you
test.
wanted?
That was a test
Yeah,
or a
it's,
lack
it's
of
a loyalty
faithfulness.
test. It's sacrifice, right? Or one that's especially gaslighty that I don't like is if they say, well, you were promised that you would be blessed, therefore you were, right? Even if you didn't perceive it, you were blessed.
You don't know.
You don't know. Maybe you were going to get hit by a bus and you didn't. So be grateful, right? There are a lot of just ways to kind of weasel out of the actual results when the scriptures tell us time and time again, you look at things by their fruits. That is part of the equation.
There again, the guy who got hit by a bus doesn't get to tell that story.
Exactly. Well, I will say that I have the faith not to make money. That, just like having the faith not to be healed, I have the faith not to make money. So I'm more righteous than any of you.
Well, you must be looking ahead or something, because you guys keep hitting these segues just perfect. We've got Elder Bednar on here to remind us, as he told the National Press Club, that with members struggling with tithing, the church does not need their money, right? So I can imagine somebody looking at this discussion and just being like, oh, Aaron, have fun with your future disciplinary council, because the church isn't going to like you advocating for a lower method, right? I think that the church only stands to benefit from what we've been discussing today, and and the members, of course. But we can take Elder Bednar at his word, especially after the EPA leak. When they say that this is about members, enjoying the benefits of full participation and full compliance with the law, it's like, well, then we ought to be really careful not to overstate that law and make the hurdle higher because of Pharisaical tendencies than what it really ought to be, right? In a couple of ways that plays out, it is through promoting temporal independence and full participation. So with temporal independence, this again is my whole motivation for being here, because just in my experience, I've literally sat across the table from people and helped them prepare budgets that are required for church assistance, because that's kind of the, we mentioned you've got to have a short-term plan out of this. Whenever somebody requests church assistance, the first thing the bishop is going to ask for is, what's your budget look like, right? And so as you're helping people with these budgets, they always default to gross tithing. And no matter how much I tried to nuance it, until recently, I didn't have all the pieces to really lock that down and be explicit with them. So I'd kind of be suggestive with it, but they never got it. The only way they get it is you are. And you can make anything work on paper, right? It's like having a flight to catch and you plan to leave at that very moment where if you hit all green lights and no traffic, you're going to make it, right? Sure, it's possible, but it's probably not going to happen. And when these budgets ultimately fail, the effects of that can be quite catastrophic. It is incredibly demoralizing for the members, they've gone through kind of the personal shame and putting themselves out there for seeking assistance. And now they've got to go back again after failing. And when you get repeated cycles of that and you're trying and you're not seeing the blessings kick in, and you're never perfect. So there's always something you can come back to and say, it's me. It worked on paper. Yeah. Life happens and it's my fault. Right? That's a very negative cycle until, like we said before, eventually they realize, like, wait a second, I'm doing as best I'm doing my best. I'm doing as good as anybody can be expected. And the whole reason I can't make ends meet is because of that. Mm-hmm. Those scenarios don't play out well. It's in the church's benefits to prevent that. Okay. Again, I've seen the personal harm, and especially when that comes to, the parents can't give their children what they need. Mm-hmm. That's something that motivates me to speak out. The church should care about full participation of its members. We're building temples at a rate never seen before, and we're also dealing with temple utilization issues, right? Okay, well, I have a sneaky suspicion that seeing how just not pragmatic that gross ideology can be for half of the membership, I really think that if we explicitly opened up the possibilities more, we'd get a lot, sure, we'd have some people paying less, but we'd have a lot more people paying something. And as Elder Bednar pointed out, how that shakes out to a net gain or loss is not the point. It should not matter. It's just about people applying what we went over earlier, right? And to layer on another effect of that, like it or not, temples come with some controversy. There's Masonic origins, messy ceiling arrangement, changes in ordinances, resource allocation, and as you guys have been covering, community relations. The church centers the temple as its preeminent worship experience. So yeah, they're seeing something good in there. But if you're closing off people arbitrarily to that good, you can't insulate them from all this controversy. And it's same thing. It's going to become a position where they're like, well, why would I even want to go? It's and again, I know some people are going to look at that and just be like, big deal. But this is aligning with, what the church's motive is. That's kind of what I'm trying to say there.
Yeah, no, I understand
anything
that.
You guys want to say on that?
I was going to say, and think about that. It is the person of a certain demographic or income bracket that is more likely to be excluded from being able to go to the temple. If this is something you value, of course, we're talking about it subjectively, because they're the ones that can't pay the tithing. They can't get the recommend. That's exactly right. If you want more people to be able to go to the temple, then relax this. I mean, you don't even have to relax it. It's already there in the church standards, but just make it more acceptable.
Yeah. And if not to make it Utah centric, but just a good example. I mean, you can have these affluent places over on the East Benches where, the whole ward cluster is basically members, and they're all well situated, and they're all full tithe payers, and they're all showing up at ward temple night, right? Spend some time over on the other side of the valley and see if that experience is similar. I'll tell you, it's not.
Yeah.
Right. And the church should care about that.
You made a great point. As a bishop, you should be saying, hey, look, here's a method that's fully endorsed by the brethren, fully in line with everything that will help you, and you can still go to the temple and not miss out on that blessing, rather than say, sorry, you didn't pay enough, you don't get to go.
Yep. Or you lose your job, or whatever other threats that might happen with that. Landon, I wish you were a bishop. Look how amazing you were when you said that. That's so kind and caring and helps everyone. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I have a different tithing program now.
Yes, you do.
My tithing program is, if I could go back, it would be, I'd pay exactly the amount of tithing. I'd calculate it the same way as the church calculates how much tithing they're going to give me back when I left. If I use that same method.
We need a graph on that, I think, Landon. I'm not sure.
I'll get to work on that after this episode.
Part two. Oh my goodness.
So one last thought with this full participation is, is missionary work. And so I'm going to close with what for me is a sad story. I'm sure people are going to say that, well, they dodged a bullet. But yeah, like I said, this is something that they wanted, and to me, it's a sad ending. So again, I served my mission in Hungary, and if you aren't aware, European missions are really, really hard. Fabulous P days. I loved the P days, and loved the work, but it was hard just because people are very rational and traditional, and that does not, make a good combination for getting people to accept a new faith paradigm, right? So I mean, typically, I think our average was maybe each missionary would probably see 1 or 2 baptisms their entire mission, which was great for Europe. Still really hard for all the day-to-day door knocking, and it was not uncommon at all for some missionaries to just see no baptismal success, if that's how they're defining it. Just to give people an idea of what it's like there. So those moments when you get to teach someone that is listening and receptive and all that, it's really special. And so I was close to the end of my mission, and my companion and I knocked on this door, and this early retirement age couple let us in, and it is awesome. They're curious about what we had to say, what we were doing out there in our shirts and ties, and the blazing heat of summer. And so they welcomed us in. They had kind of this courtyard in between their house and like a shed garage thing, and the whole thing was shaded by these grapevines that they used to make their own wine. And the man, we did the whole first discussion with him just in a Speedo. It was a fabulous European experience. But anyway, they liked what we had to say. And they listened. They actually read the Book of Mormon and felt that they had a witness of its divinity. And they came to church. They met people. They were just so bubbly and happy, and they accepted our message, though not uncritically, right? I mean, if you've been on a mission, you have those discussions where somebody's like, "Yeah, sure," and you're like, "But are you really sure? I'm not sure you understand. You don't."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like these people were just amazing in how balanced they were through everything. When it came time to teach the word of wisdom, right? That we're abstaining from alcohol. We were worried about that. These people are growing their own wine. Not a problem. Give that up. No, without an issue. And then when it came time to teach tithing, their demeanor just changed instantly. Their happiness just evaporated. And to their credit, it wasn't just something that they were unwilling to do. They asked, "We are retired and on a fixed income, and this math doesn't work. How is that supposed to work?" And it kills me that we had nothing to offer them but faith. And they said, "No, I don't think God would ask us to do that. This can't be what he wants us to do. So please leave and never come back again." And again, some people are going to say they dodged a bullet, and these people wanted it. They were benefiting from it up until that point. And if we could have taught this in a more open way of, you decide your amount, you make it work for you, even if it's just a token symbolic sacrifice, whatever you feel right with is the principle. And so like I just get the feeling that missionary work would go a lot better. We thought we were on the verge of big things 20 years ago, and it's been a revolving door. It's pretty sad to look back on, because and I know for a fact that people do struggle there, and the pathway is out of the church when that struggle happens, because you can't. It's almost impossible to just not be compliant and still show up perpetually and feel the shame and the pressure all the time. It doesn't feed, somebody's soul. And so, yeah, I just want to close this section on why the church should really care to be more explicit about following its own policy and opening this up.
Wow. So many good thoughts. This is just amazing. Is this your very last slide?
Just the very last slide. That's it.
Wow.
We
This
made
time
it.
has really flown by. I was looking at the clock going, oh my goodness, but this is such an important topic. And again, we want to remind everybody, of course, this is more of a post-nuanced Mormon podcast, but all of us have people that we know that are paying tithing, whether it's our kids, that are maybe newly married, trying to work it out, our parents that are retired, trying to work it out, friends. We all have people in our lives that care about paying tithing and they want to pay tithing. So in that construct, that's why we're talking about this. And I think it's such an important conversation. Don't you, Landon?
I do. And I want to thank Aaron for coming on the show. He came to us. He's a faithful member. He has some ideas that he wanted to share. And I think it just shows that, we can have a discussion with people on both sides of the aisle and bring up ideas and share ideas. And we didn't bite him or anything like that. I think we have a lot more in common than we have differences. In fact, I noticed he's got those plants in the back, and that looks just like mine.
You have the same.
Yeah, we got the same plants. So that tells you.
They're soul brothers.
Similarities.
Absolutely.
Can I say something on that too? Not the
Of
plans,
course.
but I mean, just the fact that you guys are willing to have a message like mine and someone of my perspective coming on here, that's such a show of integrity on your part. And I am profoundly grateful for that. Because I think I told you guys before, I've given this idea to several faithful podcasts and nobody wants to touch it.
So
right?
surprised.
Well, I mean, if they're a really, orthodox podcast, then,
Right.
Obviously they're going to view this as a heretical affront to faith.
But I feel like they might not have understood what you were saying. Maybe
Yeah.
they just, because I would say that this podcast could be viewed by any faithful person. In fact, I would say to our listeners and viewers, if you have somebody that has questions about tithing, who's a faithful, let them watch or let them listen. I just feel that it does open it up to a different thought process and maybe makes you closer to the whole spirit of tithing as it's supposed to be. You're supposed to have joy doing it. It's not supposed to be punitive.
And I love what you said, because this can even, for believing members, this can actually be a good thing. Think how many people, if they were paying on the surplus, or if they're using the surplus method as opposed to the gross method, might now be able to afford to go on a mission when they retire, because they had that savings that they were able to make and make that sacrifice. So as you said, there are opportunities that come. You're not shortchanging the Lord necessarily. You might be actually enabling the Lord by paying that way, because you can now serve in a different way, or you can
righteous stewardship
provide that. Absolutely. Yep.
That's it. No, I feel like this is good. I feel like maybe some faithful podcasters might see this and invite you on, because I think it's a very unique way to look at it. And again, backed up by your own doctrine, your own faithful sources. There's nothing you can argue within that. So
it doesn't have to be me, but I hope other people start talking about this, because this topic needs to get out of being taboo.
No, I think so too. And I love the perspective that any bishops or leaders out there that are listening, believe it or not, we do have some people in our Mormonish audience. I know in our Good Book Club, we have a sitting high councilman, and I think a couple of people, this is important. Wouldn't you like to be able to say to the people in your flock, let's find another way so that you can feel good and happy and close to the Spirit. And so I think this is extremely valuable, and I'm just wildly impressed. I mean, we talked about this a little bit ahead of time, but I had no idea all the different twists and turns to it. And it's just amazing. And Aaron, I wish you were a general authority. I'm not kidding. You're exactly the right kind of person. Where can I send your application?
You get my sustaining vote.
I sustain Aaron too. He's amazing. This is incredible. So, and I'm thinking in the future, if we think of other financial topics that, are like this in a nuanced way, let's do something else. If you have anything else you want to present like this, because I love it. Your perspective is really invaluable, just from a practical, yet spiritual, yet human perspective. And I just love that. So
I appreciate it. It's good fun being with you too.
Yeah, we really like Aaron. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody. Please comment. Oh my goodness. What are your stories with tithing? What are your thoughts now about tithing? Do you have people in your family who are struggling to pay tithing or concerned about the way tithing is handled? I think this has been absolutely invaluable, and we would love to hear what your thoughts and your stories are about this. Please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of new episodes that come out, you can hit the notification bell. If you would like to donate to Mormonish Podcast instead of paying your tithing. No, I'm totally kidding. You can do whatever you want with your charitable surplus, right? We have links in the show notes to Venmo and PayPal and also mormonishpodcast.org. And we really do sincerely appreciate all of those of you that do donate to us, because we really couldn't do it without all of your support. So thank you so much. And we will say goodbye for now to Aaron and to Landon, and we'll see everybody next time on Mormonish. Thank you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.